Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Carmine's Arena, a cultural gourmet of information, if you will, a feast for your mind and soul. And now, without further delay, the man, the myth, the maestro, Carmine Arena.
Greetings and welcome once again to Carmine's Arena, site of contest and conflict, venue for and of resolution. Resolution in terms of focus, remedy, and commitment, both yours and mine, to the preservation, the propagation, and the celebration of Western civilization. In a command performance at the White House, Vladimir Horowitz gave a virtuosic piano recital, commencing with a riveting account of the Star-Spangled Banner. The East Room was filled to capacity with an invited audience of great men and women. At the conclusion of the concert, President John F. Kennedy stood to take the microphone. Looking out over this distinguished crowd, he advanced the thought that never before had the White House gathered together so much genius, except perhaps when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. Yes, and this great and significant forefather ingeniously declared that the government that governs least governs best. But as you know, that conviction today is not the current wisdom. Nonetheless, when one beholds the state of our nation, one cannot but agree with the author of our Declaration of Independence. For our present government each day becomes ever bigger, becoming a no-fault government, and its fatuous no-fault notions seem to have seeped into every unwashed crevice of our devolving culture. A culture which rewards the lowest common denominator from out of a great people. A dynamic which continues relentlessly to spawn ever more bureaucracies, which is the administration of governance through departments and subdivisions, managed by sets of appointed unelected officials, following an inflexible routine of graceless refinement and failure. A sinkhole for the unimaginative, with their petty rules, miles of red tape, and total lack of accountability. This is not the American way, but the evil paths taken by every recorded tyrant in history. I remember when Communist Russia's premier Nikita Khrushchev appeared at the United Nations and banged his shoe on the podium and said, and I quote, "Your children's children will live under communism. You Americans are so gullible. No, you won't accept communism outright, but we'll keep feeding you small doses of socialism until you will finally wake up and find that you already have communism. We won't have to fight you. We'll so weaken your economy until you fall like overripe fruit into our hands," unquote. He said this in 1959, and in 2013, well on its way to 14, between President Obama and Premier Putin, we're almost there. Deny this, and prove thyself a nitwit. Recently, in my car driving behind a fairly sizable SUV, I couldn't help but lend credence to an easily read, homegrown bumper sticker. It broadcasts the following message: our daughter's wedding created more jobs than the stimulus. Now, perhaps that's what bureaucracies lack: an active sense of humor. For humor is ever a corrective of our errors, our blunders, and our daily foibles. It is fairly important to recognize that when we attempt to impart packets of wisdom, what is recommended is often at odds with an opposing take. Wandering over various and sundry adages, proverbs, maxims, and old sayings, I was amused by a cautionary tale of opposite truths. For example, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Yet we are also warned of out of sight, out of mind. Other examples abound, such as two heads are better than one, as opposed to too many cooks spoil the broth. Wow, how contrarian is our species. I personally feel safer absorbing a message from out a fortune cookie. For between two truths, all too often, it is the false one that is championed. Hence, the mentalities of bureaucrats and their cronies. Ergo, humor must ne'er be forsaken. Let's listen to George Burns, who observed that money is the root of all evil. Then we hear that a fool and his money is soon parted. What are they talking about? Said George Burns. If money is so evil, shouldn't it be a wise man and his money are soon parted? And another thing, how does a fool get money in the first place? I know some fools who have a lot of money, but they won't tell me how they got it, and I won't tell them. Yes, great. Human ken is flawed, my friends. Accumulate the flaws in one big place, and you end with yet again another roomy bureaucracy, slow-moving and doggedly and consistently headed in the wrong direction. If you don't believe me, you lefties out there, pick up a book and read Kafka's The Trial, Dickens' Bleak House, and its convolutions of shifting interpretations awash in small print legalese. Another book you might dip into is Joseph Heller's Catch-22. If you will allow, I coldly regard bureaucracies like ever-mounting snowflakes. Would a snowflake ever feel responsible in the slightest for the eventual avalanche? I suppose that's the reason we call irresponsible people flakes. When it comes to the damage bureaucracies induce, it becomes necessary to say, for the sake of balance, a kind word or two about the monsters. They provide safe havens for safe jobs, inordinate salaries, and handsome pensions. Since President Obama has taken office, 143,000 federal workers have been added on. Oh yes, and we're still counting. And yes, Thomas Jefferson, who knew that defiance of tyranny is obedience to God, well understood that Western civilization would have to be the continual process of setting man free from men. When it comes to big nanny government, include me out. For as you all know by now in Carmine's Arena, Carmine is for the preservation, propagation, defense, and the celebration of Western civilization. In the end, Western civilization, a totally godly structure of enduring liberty and freedom. Against this, allow me to express a personal note. In a rental property I owned came notices from the Environmental Protection Agency. They mandated changes in water consumption and set a water meter in place, a meter which monitored water usage for the entire building, as opposed to installing meters in each apartment and billing each tenant of record individually for their varying usage. Hence, I as owner was made responsible for the entire usage on site. At first, consumption was fairly reasonable, but the billing kept increasing. When I questioned the EPA for water savings as against their rising costs, get a load of their answer. They said that lower water consumption was entirely too successful, and they were losing money. Long story short, eventually the water bill exceeded property taxes. You couldn't raise rents because they are under, yet again, another bureaucracy, the Department of Housing and Community Renewal, which sets rent guidelines. To add insult to injury, the City Department of Taxation was disinterested in water consumption and its costs, thus offering no relief. There you have, my friends, the nightmare of bureaucratic inanities. And though there is much more to this tale of tyranny, I'll leave the particulars and turn to the general. For you will never understand bureaucracies until you understand that for bureaucrats procedure is everything, and outcomes are nothing. Any change is resisted because bureaucrats have a vested interest in the chaos in which they exist. The great architectural genius, Frank Lloyd Wright, who knew quite well what he was talking about, stated that bureaucrats are dead at 30 and buried at 60. Excuse me. They are like custard pie. You can't nail them to a wall. A case in point is Secretary Sebelius, who, like others of her bureaucratic kind, are capable of saying absolutely nothing and meaning it. Which reminds me again of our comedic friend, George Burns, who noted, if you can fake honesty, you got it made. Now let's turn to Newt Gingrich, who observed, and I quote, and I fully agree, that we are at the crossroads. Down one road is a European centralized bureaucratic socialist welfare system in which politicians and bureaucrats define the future. Or take the other road, which traverses a proud, solid reaffirmation of American exceptionalism. A listener sent me this brilliant prophecy made some 93 years ago by H.L. Mencken, who was a journalist, satirist, critic, and yes, a Democrat. He wrote the following in an editorial which appeared on July 26, 1920, and I quote from it. As democracy is perfected, the office of the president represents more and more closely the inner soul of the people. On some great and glorious day, the plain folks of the land will reach their heart's desire. Reach their heart's desire at last, and the White House will be occupied by a downright fool and complete narcissistic moron. So it was written, and I respectfully ask, has that day come to pass? Allow me the privilege of quoting a great and cautious thinker, Thomas Sowell, Sowell, who was an African-American columnist who knows how to think outside the box, that box being our cracker box, pun intended. He writes, "If you have always believed that everyone should play by the same rules and be judged by the same standards, that would have gotten you labeled a radical 60 years ago, a liberal 30 years ago, and a racist today." How true. If you don't grasp this meaningful insight, it's because you are committed to never agreeing to an opposing opinion. One of those trusted pupils of Saul Alinsky, a radical creature who reveled in chaos and contempt for order and standards. Further, Thomas Sowell uttered these deathless words: "It takes considerable knowledge just to realize the extent of your own ignorance." Oh, how true. One town over from me in Westchester County presides an official who fights against appearing in a public forum, particularly TV, because he doesn't wish to expose the sad fact that he is illiterate and can't read what's before him. I'm not kidding, yet he swore to uphold the Constitution he can't even read. Now, getting back to Thomas Sowell's wisdom, I here quote again, "The first lesson of economics is scarcity. There is never enough of anything to fully satisfy all those who want it. Thus, the first lesson of politics is to disregard the first lesson of economics." That is why, said Sowell, elections should be held on April 16th, the day after we pay our income taxes. That is one of the few things that might discourage politicians from being big spenders. Big spenders, I might add, who enact laws which generate bureaucracies behind which they hide. Mark Twain noted with justification that Congress is America's only native criminal class. In preparing for this episode, I found myself chortling with amusement, remembering my school days, remembering running for class president. I was an honor student running against an opponent who the term before had been left back. He won, I lost. He won because he promised that if elected, he'd see to it that we would get a swimming pool. He didn't even know how to swim. And to this day, the school not only doesn't have a pool, it doesn't even have nor boast a bathtub. What's changed? Well, an electorate who still believes government will provide. Hence, they prefer to sink while Uncle Sam provides water wings made in China. Small wonder our economy needs CPR. Yep, our modern wisdom, steeped in bureaucracies, has succeeded in taking melody out of music, pride out of appearance, courtesy out of driving, the romance out of love, taking responsibility out of parenthood, the togetherness out of family, the learning out of education, the service out of patriotism, the civility out of behavior, taking the refinement out of language, the dedication out of employment, the prudence out of spending, the ambition out of achievement, taking God out of government and school. Yes, school where education as said Yeats, is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. At this juncture, permit me to share but a few observations from and by a Canadian looking in on America. It was sent to me from Canada. They see me there apparently on YouTube. Now, here goes. This is a Canadian. You can tell he loves America, but is absolutely in despair. Only in America could the rich people who pay 86% of all income taxes be accused of not paying their fair share by people who don't pay any income taxes at all. Only in America could people claim that the government still discriminates against black Americans when they have a black president, a black attorney general, and roughly 18% of the federal workforce is black, while only 12% of the population is black. Only in America could they have had two people most responsible for our tax code: Timothy Geithner, the head of the Treasury Department, and Charles Rangel, who once ran the Ways and Means Committee. Both turn out to be tax cheats who are in favor of higher taxes. Why, of course. Only in America can they have terrorists kill people in the name of Allah and have the media primarily react by fretting that Muslims might be harmed by the backlash. And so continues the Canadian. Only in America would they make people who want to legally become American citizens wait for years in their home countries and pay tens of thousands of dollars for the privilege, while you discuss letting anyone who sneaks into the country illegally just magically become American citizens. Only in America could the people who believe in balancing the budget and sticking by the country's constitution be thought of as extremists. Only in America could you need to present a driver's license to cash a check or buy alcohol, but not to vote. Only in America could people demand the government investigate whether oil companies are gouging the public because the price of gas went up when the return on equity invested in a major U.S. oil company like Marathon Oil is less than half of a company making tennis shoes, namely Nike. Only in America could the government collect more dollars from the people than any nation in recorded history, still spend $1 trillion more than it has per year, for total spending of $7 million per minute, and complain that it doesn't have nearly enough money. Excuse me. Only in America could politicians talk about the greed of the rich at a $35,000 a plate campaign fundraising event. And lastly, only in America can a man with literally little background, no qualifications, and no experience, and a complete failure at his job, be re-elected. Now that is not an American, but a Canadian, who sees us from afar objectively. I will conclude by sharing with you some news from a fellow we have all spoken to, thanks to globalization, thanks to diversity and quotas. His name is Mujibar. Now, the personnel manager said, "Mujibar, you have passed all the tests except one. Unless you pass it, you cannot qualify for this job." Mujibar said, "I'm ready." The manager said, "Make a sentence using the words yellow, pink, and green." Mujiba thought a while and said, "I'm ready." The manager said, "Go ahead." And Mujiba said the following: "The telephone goes green, green, and I pink it up and say, 'Yellow, this is Mujiba.' Mujiba now works at a call center. As I said, no doubt you have spoken to him, I know I have, and his counterparts in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Shangri-La via San Francisco." Now, I began by talking about genius, the genius of Thomas Jefferson. And you will please note that true genius does not cater to one extreme nor the other, but embraces both extremes at once to produce the invaluable sum of its parts. Till next time, my friends, I appeal to you. Think about what I've said and keep the faith.
If you have any comments or other remarks, and that I perhaps could even read on some of these broadcasts, please do not hesitate to write to me, Carmine Arena, P.O. Box 1029, Larchmont, New York 10538.